Hello everyone, we have another audiobook for you. This is Amadeo Bordiga's 1920 Towards the Establishment of Workers' Councils in Italy, published in Il Soviet between January 1st and February 22nd of 1920, and then translated for Antagonism's Bordiga archive circa 1999. The article is a follow-up on his two previous works, The System of Communist Representation, 1919, and Is This the Time to Form Soviets, 1919, which you can find on YouTube linked in the description, or on the Library of the Communist Left streaming feed. This is being recorded in 2025 by the Solar Collective for the Library of the Communist Left. Without further delay, let's begin. 1. We have now collected quite a lot of material concerned with proposals and initiatives for establishing Soviets in Italy, and we reserve to ourselves the right to expound the elements of the argument step by step. At this stage, we wish to make a few preliminary observations of a general nature, to which we have already referred in our most recent issues. The system of proletarian representation that has been introduced for the first time ever in Russia has a twofold character: political and economic. Its political role is to struggle against the bourgeoisie until the latter has been totally eradicated. Its economic role is to create the whole novel mechanism of a communist production as the revolution unfolds and the parasitic classes are gradually eliminated. The political functions become less and less important in comparison with their economic counterparts, but in the first instance, and above all when it is a question of struggling against bourgeois power, political activity must come first. The authentic instrument of the proletariat struggle for liberation, and above all its conquest of political power, is the Communist Class Party. Under the bourgeois regime, the Communist Party, the engine of the revolution, needs organs in which it can operate. These organs are the workers' councils. To declare that they are the proletariat's organ of liberation without mentioning the role of the party, after the fashion of the program adopted at the Congress of Bologna, seems mistaken in our view. To maintain, after the fashion of the Turin L'Ordine Nuovo comrades, that even before the collapse of the bourgeoisie, the workers' councils are organs, not only of political struggle, but of technico-economic training in the communist system, can only be seen as a return to socialist gradualism. This latter, whether it is Reformism or syndicalism, is defined by the mistaken belief that the proletariat can achieve emancipation by making advances in economic relations, while capitalism still holds political power through the state. We shall now expand on the criticism of the two concepts we have mentioned. The system of proletarian representation must be rooted in the whole of the technical process of production. This is a perfectly valid principle, but it corresponds to the stage when the proletariat is organizing the new economy after a seizure of power. Apply it without modification to the bourgeois regime, and you accomplish nothing in revolutionary terms. Even at the stage which Russia has reached, the Soviet-type political representation, i.e. the ladder that culminates in the government of the people's commissars, does not start with work crews or factory shops, but from the local administrative Soviet, elected directly by the workers, grouped if possible in the respective workplaces. To be specific, the Moscow Soviet is elected by the Moscow proletariat in the ratio of 1 delegate to every 1,000 workers. Between the delegates and the electors there is no intermediary organ. This first level then leads to higher levels, to the Congress of Soviets, the Executive Committee, and finally the Government of Commissars. The Factory Council plays its part in quite a different network, that of workers' control over production. Consequently, the Factory Council, made up of one representative for every workshop, does not nominate the factory's representative in the local political administrative Soviet. This representative is elected directly and independently. In Russia, the factory councils are the basic unit of another system of representation, itself subordinate, of course, to the political network of Soviets. The system of workers' control and the people's economy. Control within the factory has a revolutionary and expropriative significance only after central power has passed into the hands of the proletariat. While the factory is still protected by the bourgeois state, the factory council controls nothing. The few functions it fulfills are the result of the traditional practice of 1. parliamentary reformism. 2. Trade union resistance, which does not cease to be a reformist way of advancing. To conclude, we do not oppose the setting up of internal factory councils if the workers themselves or their organizations demand them, but we insist that the Communist Party's activity must be based on another terrain, namely the struggle for the conquest of political power. This struggle may well be advanced fruitfully by the setting up of workers' representative bodies, but these must be urban or rural workers' councils elected directly by the names waiting to take the place of municipal councils and local organs of state power at the moment the bourgeois forces collapse. Having thus advanced our thesis, we promise to give it ample documentation and factual support, and to present our work in a report to the next meeting of the Communist faction. 2. Prior to getting down to discussing the practical problems of setting up workers, peasants, and soldiers' councils in Italy, and bearing in mind the general considerations contained in the article we published in our last issue, we wish to examine the programmatic guidelines or the Soviet system as they are developed in the documents of the Russian Revolution and in the declarations of principle issued by some or the Italian maximalist currents, such as the program adopted by the Bologna Congress, the motion proposed by Leone, and other comrades to the same Congress, and the writings of L'Ordine Nuovo on the Turin Factory Council movement. The councils and the Bolshevik program. In the documents of the Third International and the Russian Communist Party, in the masterly reports of those formidable exponents of doctrine, the leaders of the Russian revolutionary movement, Lenin, Zinoviev, Radek, Bukharin, there recurs at frequent intervals the idea that the Russian Revolution did not invent new and unforeseen structures, but merely confirmed the predictions of Marxist theory concerning the revolutionary process. The core of the imposing phenomenon of the Russian Revolution is the conquest of political power on the part of the working masses, and the establishment of their dictatorship as the result of authentic class war. The Soviets, and it is well to recall that the word Soviet simply means council and can be employed to describe any sort of representative body, the Soviets, as far as history is concerned, are the system of representation employed by the proletarian class once it has taken power. The Soviets are the organs that take the place of the parliament and the bourgeois administrative assemblies and gradually replace all the other ramifications of the state. To put it in the words of the most recent Congress of the Russian Communists, as quoted by Comrade Zinoviev, the Soviets are the state organizations of the workers and poor peasants. They exercise the dictatorship of the proletariat during the stage when all previous forms of the state are being extinguished. In the final analysis, this system of state organizations gives representation to all producers in their capacity as members of the working class, and not as members of a particular trade or industrial sector. According to the latest manifesto of the Third International, the Soviets represent a new type of mass organization, one which embraces the working class in its entirety, irrespective of individual trades or levels of political maturity. The basic units of the Soviet administrative network are the urban and rural councils. The network culminates in the government of commissars. And yet it is true that during the phase of economic transformation, other organs are emerging parallel to this system, such as the system of workers' control and the people's economy. It is also true, as we have stressed many times, that this economic system will gradually absorb the political system. Once the expropriation of the bourgeoisie is completed, then there is no further need for a central authority. But the essential problem during the revolutionary period, as emerges clearly from all the Russian documents, is that of keeping the various local and sectional demands and interests subordinate to the general interests, in space and time, of the revolutionary movement. Not until the two sets of organs are merged will the network of production be thoroughly communist, and only then will that principle, which in our view is being given exaggerated importance, of a perfect match between the system of representation and the mechanism of the productive systems, be fully realized. Prior to that stage, while the bourgeoisie is still resisting and above all while it still holds power, the problem is to achieve a representative system in which the general interest prevails. Today, while the economy is still based on individualism and competition, the only form in which this higher collective interest can be manifested is a system of political representation in which the Communist political party is active. We shall come back to this question and demonstrate how the desire to over-concretize and technically determine the Soviet system, especially when the bourgeoisie is still in power, puts the cart before the horse and lapses into the old errors of syndicalism and reformism. For the moment, we quote these non-ambiguous words of Sinofiev. The Communist Party unifies the vanguard of the proletariat which is struggling, in conscious fashion, to put the communist program into effect. In particular, it is striving to introduce its program into the state organizations, the Soviets, and to achieve complete dominance within them. To conclude, the Russian Soviet Republic is led by the Soviets, which represent 10 million workers out of a total population of about 80 million. But essentially, appointments to the executive committees of the local and central Soviets are settled in the sections and congresses of the great Communist Party, which has mastery over the Soviets. This corresponds to the stirring defense by Radek of the revolutionary role of minorities. It would be as well not to create a majoritarian workerist fetishism which could only be to the advantage of reformism and the bourgeoisie. The party is in the front line of the revolution insofar as it is potentially composed of men who think and act like members of the future working humanity in which all will be producers and harmoniously inserted into a marvelous mechanism of functions and representation.
This idea of Leone's and of the many comrades who signed his motion is quite different from our own, which we have deducted from Marxism and from the lessons of the Russian Revolution. What they are doing is overemphasizing a form in place of a force, just as the syndicalists did in the case of the trade unions, attributing to their minimalist practice the magical virtue of being able to transform itself into the social revolution, just as syndicalism was demolished in the first phase of criticism by true Marxists, and subsequently by the experience of the syndicalist movements which all over the world have collaborated with the bourgeois regime, providing it with elements for its preservation, so Leone's idea collapses before the experience of the counter-revolutionary social democratic workers' councils, which are precisely those which have not been penetrated successfully by the communist political program. Only the party can embody the dynamic revolutionary engines of the class. It would be trivial to object that socialist parties too have compromised, since we are not exalting the virtues of the party form, but those of the dynamic content which is to be found only in the Communist Party. Every party defines itself on the basis of its program, and its function cannot be compared with those of other parties, whereas of necessity all the trade unions, and even in a technical sense, all the workers' councils have functions in common with one another. The shortcomings of the social reformist parties was not that they were parties, but that they were not communist and revolutionary parties. These parties led the counter-revolution, whereas the communist parties, in opposition to them, led and nourished revolutionary action. Thus, there are no organs which are revolutionary by virtue of their form. There are only social forces that are revolutionary on account of their orientation. These forces transform themselves into a party that goes into battle with a program.
The councils and the initiative of L'Ordine Nuovo in Turin. In our view, the comrades around the newspaper L'Ordine Nuovo go even further than this. They are not even happy with the wording of the party's program, because they claim that the Soviets, including those of a technical, economic character, the factory councils, not only are already in existence and functioning as the organs of proletarian liberation struggle under the bourgeois regime, but have already become organs for the reconstruction of the communist economy. In fact, they publish in their newspaper the section of the party's program that we quoted above, leaving out a few words so as to transform its meaning in accordance with their own point of view. They will have to be opposed by new proletarian organs, workers, peasants and soldiers' councils, councils of the public economy, organs of social and economic transformation and for the reconstruction of the new communist order. But this article is already a long one, so we postpone to our next issue the exposition of our profound dissension from this principle. In our view, it runs the risk of ending up as a purely reformist experiment involving modification of certain functions of the trade unions and perhaps the promulgation of a bourgeois law on workers' councils. 3. At the end of our second article on the establishment of Soviets in Italy, we referred to the Turin movement to establish factory councils. We do not share the point of view of which inspires the efforts of the L'Ordine Nuovo comrades, and while appreciating their tenacity in making the fundaments of communism better known, we believe that they have committed major errors of principle and tactics. According to them, the essence of communist revolution lies in the setting up of new organs of proletarian representation, whose fundamental character is their strict alignment with the process of production. Eventually, these organs are to control production directly. We have already made the point that we see this as overemphasis on the idea of a formal coincidence between the representative organs of the working class and the various aggregates of the technico-economic system of production. This coincidence will in fact be achieved at a much more advanced stage of the communist revolution, when production is socialized and its various constituent activities are subordinated in harmonious fashion to the general and collective interests. Prior to this stage and during the period of transition from a capitalist to a communist economy, the groupings of producers are in a constant state of flux, and their individual interests may at times clash with the general and collective interests of the revolutionary movement of the proletariat. This movement will find its real instrument in a working class representative institution in which each individual participates in his capacity as a member of the working class and as such interested in a radical change in social relations, rather than as a component of a particular trade, factory or local group. So long as political power remains in the hands of the capitalist class, a representative organ embodying the general revolutionary interests of the proletariat can only be found in the political arena. It can only be a class party that has the personal adherence of the sort of people who, in order to dedicate themselves to the cause of the revolution, have managed to overcome their narrow, selfish, sectional, and even sometimes class interests. The latter case obtaining when the party admits deserters from the bourgeois class into its ranks, provided that they are supporters of the communist program. It is a serious error to believe that by importing the formal structures which one expects to be formed to manage communist production into the present proletarian environment, among the wage earners of capitalism, one will bring into being forces which are in themselves and through inner necessity revolutionary. This was the error of the syndicalists, and this too is the error of the overzealous supporters of the factory councils. The article published by Comrade C. Nicciolini in Comunismo comes at an opportune moment. He notes that in Russia, even after the proletarian seizure of power, the factory councils frequently placed obstacles in the path of the revolutionary measures. To an even greater extent than the trade unions, they counterposed the pressures of narrow interest to the unfolding of the revolutionary process. Even within the network of the communist economy, the factory councils are not the principal determinants of the production process. In the organs which fulfill this function, councils of the political economy, the factory councils have fewer representatives than the trade unions or the proletarian state authorities. It is this centralized political network that is the instrument and the dominant factor in the revolution. Understood not only as a struggle against the political resistance of the bourgeois class, but also as a process of socializing wealth. At the juncture we have reached in Italy, viz., the juncture where the proletarian state is still a programmatic aspiration, the fundamental problem is the conquest of power on the part of the proletariat, or better, the communist proletariat, i.e., the workers who are organized into a class-based political party who are determined to make the historical form of revolutionary power, the dictatorship of the proletariat, into a concrete reality. Comrade A. Tasca himself in L'Ordine Nuovo, number 22, clearly expounds his disagreement with the program of the maximalist majority adopted at the Bologna Congress, and his even greater disagreement with us substantialists, in the following passage that deserves to be reproduced. Quote, "Another point in the party's new program deserves to be considered. The new proletarian organs, workers', peasants' and soldiers' councils, councils of the public economy, etc., functioning initially under the bourgeois regime as instruments of the violent struggle for liberation, are subsequently transformed into the organs of social and economic transformation for the reconstruction of the new communist order. At an earlier session of the Commission, we had stressed the shortcomings of such a formulation, which entrusted different functions to the new organs initially and subsequently, separated by the seizure of power on the part of the proletariat. Gennari had promised to make an alteration along the lines of, initially predominantly as instruments, but it is evident that he eventually abandoned the idea, and as I was unable to attend the last session of the Commission, I could not make him adopt it again. There is in this formulation, however, a veritable point of disagreement which, while bringing Gennari, Bombacci, and others closer to the abstentionists, puts at a greater distance between them and those who believe that the new workers' organs cannot function as instruments of the violent struggle for liberation, except and to the degree that they become organs of social and economic transformation, at once rather than subsequently. The proletariat's liberation is achieved through the manifestation of its ability to control in an autonomous and original fashion the social processes it creates by and for itself. Liberation consists in the creation of the sorts of organs which, if they are active and alert by virtue of this fact alone, provoke the social and economic transformation which is their goal. This is not a question of form, but of substance. In the present formulation, we repeat, the compilers of the program have ended up adhering to Bordiga's conception, which attaches more importance to the conquest of power than to the formation of Soviets. For the present period, Bordiga sees the Soviets as having more political function, in the strict sense of the word, than an organic role of economic and social transformation. Just as Bordiga maintains that the complete Soviet will come into being only during the period of the dictatorship of the proletariat, so Gennari, Bombacci, etc. argue that only the conquest of power, which thereby acquires a political character, and so brings us back to full circle to the public powers that had already been superseded, can provide the Soviets with their true, full functions. It is this which is, in our opinion, the nub of the argument, and it must lead us, sooner or later, to a further revision of the newly adopted program." End quote. According to Tasca, then, the working class can project its stages of liberation even before it has wrested power from the bourgeoisie. Moreover, Tasca lets it be understood that this conquest could occur even without violence, once the proletariat had completed its work of technical preparation and social education. Here we have the concrete revolutionary method of the L'Ordine Nuovo comrades. We will not proceed at length to demonstrate how this idea eventually coincides with that of Reformism and becomes foreign to the fundamentals of revolutionary Marxism. According to Marxist doctrine, the revolution does not occur as a result of the education, cultural, technical capacity of the proletariat, but as a result of the inner crises of the system of capitalist production. Like Enrico Leone, Tasca and his friends attach too much importance to the appearance in the Russian Revolution of a new social representative organ, the Soviet, and endow it with an inner force such that its mere establishment constitutes a wholly novel historical solution to the proletariat struggle against capitalism. But the Soviets, most successfully defined by Comrade Zinoviev as the state organs of the working class, are nothing other than the organs of proletarian power. Exercising the revolutionary dictatorship of the working class, it is this latter which is the linchpin of the Marxist system, and whose first positive experience was the Paris Commune of 1871. The Soviets are a form, not the cause, of the revolution. In addition to this disagreement, there is another point which separates us from the Turin comrades. The Soviets, state organization of the victorious proletariat, are not all the same as the factory councils, nor do these latter constitute the first step or rung of the Soviet political system. This confusion is also present in the declaration of the principles adopted by the first assembly of workshop delegates from the factories of Turin, which begins as follows. Quote, "The factory delegates are the sole and authentic social, economic and political representatives of the proletarian class, by virtue of their being elected by all workers at their workplace on the basis of universal suffrage. At the various levels of their constitution, the delegates embody the union of all workers as realized in the organs of production: work crew, workshop, factory, union of the factories in a given industry, union of the productive enterprises in a city, union of the organs of production in the mechanical and agricultural industry of a district, province, region, the nation, the world, whose authority and social leadership are invested in the councils and the council system." End quote. This declaration is unacceptable, since proletarian power is formed directly within the municipal soviets of town and country without passing via factory councils and committees. As we have repeated many times, this fact also emerges from the lucid expositions of the Russian Soviet system published in L'Ordine Nuovo itself. The factory councils are organs whose task will be to represent the interest of groups of workers during the period of revolutionary transformation of production. They presented not only a particular group's determination to achieve liberation through socialization of the private capitalist firm, but also the group's concern for the manner in which its interests will be taken into account during the process of socialization itself, a process disciplined by the organized will of the whole of the working collectivity. The workers' interests have until now been represented by the trade unions. Throughout the period when the capitalist system appeared stable and there was scope only for putting upward pressure on wages, the unions will continue to exist during the revolutionary period, and naturally enough there will be a demarcation dispute with the factory councils, which only emerge when the abolition of private capitalism is seen to be imminent, as it happened in Turin. However, it is not a matter of great revolutionary moment to decide whether non-union members should participate or no in the elections for delegates. If it is logical that they should in fact participate, given the very nature of the factory council, it certainly does not appear logical to us that there should be a mingling of organs and functions between councils and unions, along the lines of the Turin proposals. Compelling, for example, the Turin section of Metal Workers' Federation to elect its own executive council from the Workshop Delegates Assembly. At any rate, the relations between councils and unions as representatives of special interests of particular groups of workers will continue to be very complex. They will be settled and harmonized only in a very advanced stage of the communist society, when the possibility of the interest of a group of producers being at variance with the general interest in the process of production will be reduced to a minimum. What is important to establish is that the communist revolution will be led and conducted by an organ representing the working class politically. Prior to the smashing of the bourgeois power, this is a political party. Subsequently, it is the system of political soviets elected directly by the masses, with the aim of choosing representatives who have a general political program and are not merely the exponents of the narrow interests of a trade or firm. The Russian system is so contrived that a town's municipal soviet is composed of one delegate for every group of proletarians, who vote for a single name only. The only delegates, however, are proposed to the electors by the political party. The same process is repeated for the second and third degrees of delegation to the higher organs of the state system. Thus, it is always a single political party, the Communist Party, which seeks and obtains from the electors a mandate to administrate power. We are certainly not saying that the Russian system should be adopted in an uncritical fashion elsewhere, but we do feel that the principle underlying the revolutionary system of representation vis-à-vis the subjection of selfish and sectional interest to the collective interest should be adhered to even more closely than in Russia. Would it usefully serve the communists' revolutionary struggle if the network of political system of representation of the working class were instituted now? This is the problem we shall examine in the next article, when we discuss the relevant proposals elaborated by the party leadership. We shall remain unshaken in our conviction that such a representative system should be quite different from the system of factory councils and committees that has begun to form in Turin, and indeed this is partially recognized in the party's proposals. Number 4. We believe we have already said enough concerning the difference between factory councils and political administrative councils of the workers and peasants. The Factory Council represents workers' interests which extend no farther than the narrow circle of the industrial firm. Under a communist regime, it is the basic unit of the system of workers' control, which has a certain part to play in the system of councils of the economy. A system which will eventually take over the technical and economic management of production. But the Factory Councils has nothing to do with the system of political Soviets, the depositories of proletarian power. Under the bourgeois regime, therefore, the Factory Council, or for that matter the trade union, cannot be viewed as an organ for the conquest of political power. If, on the other hand, one were to view them as organs for the emancipation of the proletariat, via a route that does not involve the revolutionary conquest of power, one would be lapsing into the syndicalist error. The comrades around L'Ordine Nuovo are hardly correct when they maintain, as they have done in the polemic with Guerra di Classe, that the Factory Council movement, as they theorize it, is not in some sense a syndicalist movement. Marxism is characterized by its prediction that the proletarian struggle for emancipation will be divided into a number of great historical phases, in which political activity and economic activity vary enormously in its importance. The struggle for power, the exercise of power, the dictatorship of the proletariat, in the transformation of the economy, the society without classes and without a political state. To identify in the role of the liberation organs of the proletariat the stages of the political processes with their economic counterparts is to lapse into the petit bourgeois caricature of Marxism called economism, which in turn can be classified into reformism and syndicalism. Overemphasis on the Factory Council is just a resurrection of this hoary old terror, which unites the petit bourgeois Proudhon with all those revisionists who believe they have transcended Marx. Under a bourgeois regime, then, the Factory Council represents the interest of the workers in a particular enterprise, just as it will do under a communist regime. It arises when circumstances demand it, through changes in the methods of proletarian economic organization, but perhaps to an even greater extent than the trade union, the Council opens its flank to the deviations of reformism. The old minimalist tendency that argues in favor of compulsory arbitration and profit sharing by the workers, i.e. their participation in the management and administration of the factory, could well find in the Factory Council the basis for drafting of an anti-revolutionary piece of social legislation. This is happening in Germany at the moment, where the independents are opposing not the principle but the manner of the draft legislation, in stark contrast to the communists, who maintain that the democratic regime cannot grant the proletariat any form of control whatsoever over capitalist functions. It should thus be clear that it makes no sense to speak of workers' control until political power rests in the hands of the proletarian state. Such control can only be exercised as a prelude to the socialization of firms and their administration by appropriate organs of the collectivity in the name of the proletarian state and on the basis of power. Councils of workers, industrial workers, peasants and, on occasion, soldiers are, as is clear, the political organs of the proletariat, the foundations of the proletarian state. The urban and rural local councils take the place of the municipal councils under the bourgeois regime. The provincial and regional Soviets take the place of the present provincial councils. With this difference, the provincial Soviets are not elected directly, but indirectly from the local Soviets. The State Congress of Soviets, together with the Central Executive Committee, take the place of the bourgeois parliament, with the difference again that they are not directly elected, but by third or even a fourth degree suffrage. There is no need here to emphasize the other differences, of which the most important is the elector's right of recall of any delegate at any time. If the mechanism to cope with these recalls is to be flexible, then the elections in the first place should not be based on list of candidates, but should involve giving a single delegate to a grouping of the electors who, if possible, should live and work together. But the fundamental characteristic of this whole system does not reside in these technicalities, which have nothing magical about them, but rather in principle which lays down the right to vote, both actively and passively, is reserved to the workers alone and denied to the bourgeoisie. As far as the formation of municipal Soviets is concerned, two errors are commonly encountered. One is the idea that the delegates to the Soviets are elected by factory councils and committees, executive commissions of the councils of workshop delegates, where in fact, as we make no apology for repeating, the delegates are elected directly by the mass of electors. This error is reproduced in the Bombacci proposal for establishing Soviets in Italy, paragraph 6. The other error consists in thinking that the Soviet is a body composed of representatives simply nominated by the Socialist Party, the trade unions and the factory councils. Comrade Ambrosini, for example, makes this error in his proposals. Such a system might perhaps be useful in order to form Soviets quickly and on a provisional basis, but it does not correspond to their definitive structure. It is true that in Russia, a small percentage of delegates to the Soviet are added to those directly elected by the proletarian electors. But in reality, the Communist Party, or any other party, obtains its representation by standing tried and proven members of its organization as candidates, and by campaigning around its program before the electorate. In our view, a Soviet can only be revolutionary when a majority of its delegates are members of the Communist Party. All of this, it should be understood, refers to the period of the proletarian dictatorship. Now we come to the vexed question. What should be the role and characteristics of the Workers' Council while the power of the bourgeoisie is still intact? In Central Europe at the moment, workers' councils coexist with the bourgeois democratic state, which is all the more anti-revolutionary in that it is republican and social democratic. What is the significance of this proletarian representative system, if it is not the depository and foundation of state power? At the very least, does it act as an effective organ of struggle for the realization of the proletarian dictatorship? These questions are answered by the Austrian comrade Otto Marschall in an article we came across in the Geneva journal Nouvelle Internationale. He states that in Austria, the councils have brought about their own paralysis and handed over their power to the National Bourgeois Assembly. In Germany, on the other hand, according to Marschall, once the majoritarians and independents had left the councils, these latter became the true foci of the struggle for proletarian emancipation, and Noske had to smash them in order to allow social democracy to govern. In Austria, however, Marschall concludes, the existence of councils within the democratic system, or rather the existence of democracy in spite of the councils, proves that these workers' councils are far from playing the role of what are called Soviets in Russia. And he expresses the doubt that perhaps at the moment of the revolution, alternative, truly revolutionary Soviets may emerge and become depositories of proletarian power in place of these domesticated versions. The party program adopted at Bologna declares that Soviets should be set up in Italy as organs of revolutionary struggle. The object of the Bombacci proposal is to concretize this aim. Before getting down to details, let us discuss the general ideas which have inspired Comrade Bombacci. First of all, and let no one accuse us of being pedantic, let us request a formal clarification. In the phrase, only a national institution that is broader than the Soviets can usher the present period towards the final revolutionary struggle against the bourgeois regime and its democratic mask, parliamentarianism. Does it mean that parliamentarism is the aforementioned broader institution, or is it the democratic mask? We fear that the first interpretation must be the right one. A feeling which is confirmed by the paragraph on the Soviets' program of action, which is a strange mixture of the functions of the latter with the party's parliamentary activity. If the councils to be set up are to carry out their activities on this ambiguous terrain, then it would certainly be better not to set them up at all. The idea that the Soviets should have the role of working out proposals for socialist and revolutionary legislation, which socialist deputies will place before the bourgeois state. Here we have a proposal that makes a fine pair with the one on communal electionist Sovietism, which was so well demolished by our own DL. For the moment, we shall go no further than to remind comrades who put forward such proposal of one of Lenin's conclusions in the declaration adopted by the Moscow Congress. Put a distance between yourself and those who delude the proletariat by proclaiming the possibility of their victors within the bourgeois framework, and propose that the new proletarian organs should combine with or collaborate with the instruments of bourgeois domination. If the former are Social Democrats, who are still members of our party, should we not recognize the latter in the electionist maximalist, concerned as they are with justifying their parliamentary and communal activity by monstrous pseudo-Soviet projects? Are the comrades in the faction which was victorious at Bologna blind to the fact that these people are not even in line with that form of communist electionism which may legitimately be opposed, on the basis of the arguments of Lenin and certain German communists, to our irreducible, principled abstentionism? Number 5. With this article, we propose to conclude our exposition, though we may resume the discussion in polemic with comrades who have commented on our point of view in other newspapers. The discussion has now been taken up by the whole of the socialist press. The best articles we have come across are those by C. Nicolini in Avanti. These articles were written with great clarity and in line with genuine Marxist principle. We fully concur with them. The Soviets, the Council of Workers, Peasants and Soldiers are the form adopted by the representative system of the proletariat in its exercise of power after the smashing of the capitalist state. Prior to the conquest of power, when the bourgeoisie is still politically dominant, it can happen that special historical conditions, probably corresponding to serious convulsions in the institutional arrangement of the state and society, bring Soviets into existence. And it can be very appropriate for communists to facilitate and stimulate the birth of these new organs of the proletariat. We must, however, be quite clear that their formation in this manner cannot be an artificial procedure, the mere application of a recipe, and that in any case, the simplest establishment of workers' councils, as the form of the proletarian revolution, does not imply that the problem of the revolution is resolved, nor that infallible conditions have been laid for its success. The revolution may not occur even when councils exist. We shall cite examples. If these are not infused with the political and historical consciousness of the proletariat, a consciousness which is condensed, one might say, in the Communist political party. The fundamental problem of the revolution thus lies in gauging the proletariat's determination to smash the bourgeois state and take power into its own hands. Such a determination on the part of the broad masses of the working class exists as a direct result of the economic relations of exploitation by capital. It is these which place the proletariat in an intolerable situation and drive it to smash the existing social forms. The task of the communists, then, is to direct this violent reaction on the part of the masses and give it greater efficiency. The communists, as the manifesto said long ago, have a superior knowledge of the conditions of class struggle and the proletariat's emancipation than the proletariat itself. The critique they make of history and of the constitution of society places them in a position to make fairly accurate predictions concerning the development of the revolutionary process. It is for this reason that communists form the class's political party, which sets itself the task of unifying the proletarian forces and organizing the proletariat into the dominant class through the revolutionary conquest of power. When the revolution is imminent and its preconditions have matured in the real world, a powerful communist party must exist, and its consciousness of the events which lie ahead of it must be particularly acute. As regards the revolutionary organs which will exercise proletarian power and represent the foundations of the revolutionary state on the morrow of the collapse of the bourgeoisie, their consciousness of their role will depend on the extent to which they are led by workers who are conscious of the need for a dictatorship of their own class, i.e. communist workers. Wherever this is not the case, these organs will concede the power they have won, and the counter-revolution will triumph. Thus, if at any given moment these organs are required and communists need to concern themselves with setting them up, it should not therefore be thought that in them we have the means of readily outflanking the bourgeoisie and almost automatically overcoming its resistance to the ceding of power. Can the Soviets, the state organs of the victorious proletariat, play a role as organs of revolutionary struggle for the proletariat while capitalism still controls the state? The answer is yes, in the sense, however, that at any given stage they may constitute the right terrain for the revolutionary struggle that the party is waging. And at that particular stage, the party has to fashion such terrain, such grouping of forces, for itself. Today, in Italy, Have we reached this stage of struggle? We feel that we are very close to it. But there is one more stage to go through. The Communist Party, which has to work within the Soviets, does not yet exist. We are not saying that the Soviets will wait for it to be before they emerge. It could happen that events occur differently. But then we will run this grave risk that the immaturity of the party will allow these organs to fall into the hands of the reformists, the accomplices of the bourgeoisie, the saboteurs, and of the falsifiers of the revolution. And so we feel that the problem of forging a genuine communist party in Italy is much more urgent than the problem of creating Soviets. To study both problems and establish the optimal conditions in which to tackle both without delay, this too is acceptable, but without setting fixed and schematic dates for an almost official inauguration of the Soviets in Italy. To accomplish the formation of the genuine Communist Party means sorting out the communists from the reformists and social democrats. Some comrades believe that the very proposal to set up Soviets would also facilitate this sort of sorting out process. We do not agree, for the very reason that the Soviet, in our view, is not in its essence a revolutionary organ. In any case, if the rise of the Soviet is to be the source of political clarification, we fail to see how this may be accomplished on the basis of an understanding, as in Bombaci's proposal, between reformists, maximalists, syndicalists, and anarchists. On the contrary, the forging of a sound and healthy revolutionary movement in Italy will never be accomplished by advancing new organs modeled on future forms, like factory councils or Soviets, just that it was an illusion to believe that the revolutionary spirit could be salvaged from reformism by importing it into the unions, seen as the nucleus of the future society. We will not affect the sorting out process through a new recipe, which will frighten no one, but by abandoning once and for all the old recipes, the pernicious and fatal methods of the past. For well-known reason, we feel that if a method has to be abandoned and expelled along with non-communists from our ranks, then it should be the electoral method. And we see no other route to setting up the Communist Party that is worthy to be an affiliate of Moscow. Let us work towards this goal, beginning, as Nicciolini puts it so well, with the elaboration of a consciousness, a political culture in the leaders, through a more serious study of the problems of the revolution. With fewer distractions from spurious, electoral, parliamentary, and minimalist activities. Let us work towards this goal. Let us issue more propaganda concerning the conquest of power, to build awareness of what the revolution will be, what its organs will be, how the Soviets will really function. Then we can say we have done truly valuable work towards establishing the councils of the proletariat and winning within them the revolutionary dictatorship that will open up the radiant road to communism. Appendix. The Leone Statement. Quote, the Bologna Congress of the Socialist Party proclaims and recognizes that the Russian Revolution, which it salutes as the most magnificent event in the history of the world proletariat, has sparked the necessity to facilitate its expansion into all the countries of capitalist civilization. It believes that the methods and forms of this revolutionary expansion, destined to transform the Russian upheaval into a total social revolution, are to be sought in the models of the revolution which, although it is called Russian in reference to geography, is universal in character. A revolution founded on the principle of uniting the proletarians of the world. The lessons we may learn from this revolution of the Soviets, a revolution which has realized in practice all the expectation of the authentic champions of the cause of socialism, may be summarized in the following points. 1. The class struggle has been revealed as the true engine of the present history of mankind, demonstrating its capacity to smash the social national union to which bourgeois governments with their mystifications intended to entrust the task of eliminating or delaying it. 2. The socialist revolution has manifested a twofold movement in practice. A movement of erosion and emptying of state powers and negation of the fundamental institutions which democratic forms utilize to deflect the historical mission of the proletariat, i.e. constituent assemblies, which placed oppressed and oppressors on a sham footing of legal equality, and the parliaments which emerged from them, complementary organs of state sovereignty and not expressions of the popular will. B. A movement of construction, Thanks to a class organ of new creativity, the Soviet of workers, peasants and soldiers, which as an organ linking all the oppressed, desirous of attaining the giddy heights already reached by the Russian pioneers, should henceforth be established throughout Italy and Western Europe, and whose social composition should consist of the masses of workers and peasants, and also, without abandoning their individual specificity, the parties which conduct a revolutionary campaign for the abolition of private ownership and the powers of the bourgeois state. The trade unions which will operate on a more elevated and revolutionary social-political level within the Soviet than they are hitherto achieved on account of their corporative structure, the members of the cooperative movement, who in the Soviet will be able to struggle against the capitalist regime as allies of the wage earners, making up the revolutionary inactivity of their organization, and the working class leagues of war veterans. 3. The political struggle against the state, a military organ of war, in every political form open to it, must, as in Russia, have the passion and rebellious elan, because socialism has been transformed from a pure problem in social logic into a furnace of ardor and enthusiasm, by implanting in the civil and military proletariat the confidence that they can effect the transfer of power to the Soviets and subsequently defend them against any revolutionary attack. This and nothing else is the summons to violence that the Russian pioneers challenged us with. It is a debt to honor and a necessity for us to take it up, rather than the conflicting chaos against which socialism in Russia has become the guarantee, as the bearer of a new order. 4. The Russian Bolshevik Party, and equally the Italian Socialist Party, will not give up its existence until the Soviet experiment has reached full maturity. An experiment which must at once be initiated, though it must subordinate all its activities to the principles suggested by the Russian revolutionary experience, which teaches that only the proletariat grouped in Soviets, which are superior to parties, schools, corporations, may take great historical initiatives and bring them to a triumphant conclusion. And that brings us to the end of this text. If you would like to contribute to the project, send us an email at the addresses linked in the description. And make sure to share this project with any comrades you think may be interested in the work we do. Ladies, gentlemen, and non-binaries, have a lovely day. Thank you for listening.